Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope everyone's doing well, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Jazakallah khairan, first of all, to Sheikh Yaqub for inviting me over to do this webinar on the conquest of Constantinople. And Jazakallah khairan for the introduction as well. So yeah, like we said, the topic of today's webinar is the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople and how Sultan Mehmed II changed the course of history. The conquest of Constantinople was a conquest so great and so pivotal and significant that, like it says, it literally changed the course of history forever and ensured that Islam penetrated into the deepest and westernmost parts of Europe itself. Perhaps without that conquest, me and you today may not be living here in Britain as Muslims or wherever you are in Western Europe. And it was a conquest of a city so grand and so magnificent that Napoleon himself once said that if the entire world was just one country, one state, then Constantinople would be its capital because geographically it's located right in the middle of Europe and Asia. And not only was it geographically important, but also very politically and symbolically important. Anyone who wanted any commander, any ruler, any emperor, any king who wanted to be known as a world conqueror, wanted to be their name to be recorded in the annals of history as a world conqueror, knew that they cannot achieve this unless they conquered Constantinople. And so it was, to that effect and to achieve that, that 32 different armies laid siege to Constantinople. 32 different armies in up until 1453 laid siege to Constantinople. But regardless, despite their military superiority and their numerical superiority, every army was pushed back by the infamous Theodosian walls of Constantinople. Constantinople was surrounded by walls, and those land walls and those sea walls were so strong and powerful that it repelled and pushed back every single army that ever dared to knock on the doors of Constantinople. So how then did this young Sultan Mehmed II, only 21 years of age when he achieved this magnificent feat, how did he achieve what his father before him could not achieve when he laid siege to Constantinople, what three other Muslim armies could not achieve when they laid siege to Constantinople, and what 32 armies in total could not achieve when they laid siege to Constantinople? How is it that this one young ruler, who when he came to the throne, he was riddled as the boy Sultan because of his age. He was only 19 when he came to the Ottoman throne. And we'll see the challenges he faced. How did this young man conquer Constantinople and achieve the impossible? But to understand that and to truly appreciate this magnificent conquest and feat of military ingenuity, we have to go back all the way to the rise of Islam, back to pre-Islamic to the Islamic Arabia during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know that prophethood began in 610 CE, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, for 13 years, he preached in Mecca, but most people were not accepting Islam and they were being persecuted and tortured severely. And because of that, he was forced to travel to Medina, flee his home and travel to Medina. And in that time, there were major encounters he had with the non-Muslims of Mecca. And in one of those battles, Battle of the Trench or Khandaq or Ahzab, there's many names given to this battle. The Muslims were, about to be attacked in Medina by a coalition army of 10,000 soldiers. And in this time, they didn't know what to do because Medina was going to be besieged by a large group of enemies. So one of the companions recommended that they dig a trench around Medina. On one side, Medina is surrounded by volcanoes. On the other side, there are large fortresses that belong to the Jews, who the Muslims had an alliance with. And on one side, they could be attacked. So on that one side that they could be attacked, they decided to dig a trench. And whilst they were digging this trench in this situation, this desperate situation that they were in of survival, whilst they were digging this trench, they were, extremely hungry. Companions barely had any food to eat. So they tied rocks to their stomach to stop themselves from falling over. And when they were digging the trench, there was a rock that they came across that they could not break. None of the companions could break it. And so they asked the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, a man who's over the age of 50 at this point, they asked him, "Can you break it?" And so he hits the rock 3 times with his stick, and each time there's a massive flash of lightning, to which he says, "Allahu Akbar" each time. And so the companions asked him, what happened? What was this lightning and that you said Allahu Akbar? And he said that each time I struck the rock, I was shown a vision. One time I was shown that we will conquer Syria, and I can see the palaces of Damascus from here. One time I was shown that we will conquer Persia, and in another strike I was shown that we'll conquer Yemen. And when the Jews heard about this, the neighboring Jews heard that, look at these Muslims, they're digging a trench to stop themselves from being annihilated. They're talking about destroying the most powerful empires on the earth at that time, the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. And so whilst the Jews laughed at them, and whilst nobody believed this prophecy, apart from the Muslims themselves, within 15 years of the Prophet's passing, the Muslims had all but destroyed the Persian Empire and conquered it in its entirety, Iraq and Iran and any other parts of the Persian Empire. Yemen was now part of the Muslim Empire. Syria and large parts of North Africa, including Egypt, were also part of the Muslim Empire under the Rashidun Khulafa Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Umar, Uthman, and Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in. All of them together, one ruler after another, managed to conquer these large parts of the world. And the conquest did not stop there. After the passing of Ali radiallahu anhu, after his assassination, and when Muawiyah radiallahu anhu takes control of the Muslim Empire, and founds the Umayyad dynasty, the Muslims push the borders of their state, this new founded empire, to southern France in the west and to the steppes of China in the east. One of the largest empires to ever exist in history. And you can see here there's a map on the screen of how large the Muslim empire was. You can see to southern France in the west, and all the way the map extends even further to the steppes of China in the east. And the Abbasids, they continue to expand. However, they do not expand as much as the previous rulers did. They focus more on scientific advancements, and we all know about the history of the infamous city of Baghdad and the scientific advancements that were made there. Now, what happens after this? After the Umayyads and the Abbasids expand the Muslim empire, the Abbasid Khilafah itself, by the way, historians say was the seventh largest empire to ever exist in the history of humanity. So you can think about all the different empires that existed, and the Abbasids were the seventh largest to ever exist. Now, a question for you, for all of you, is what happens afterwards then? We know that the Abbasids, they expand as well, and there's a focus on scientific advancements. But what happens after this? Does anyone know about because now the Muslim world falls into decline after this. And does anyone know, you can put it into the chat if you want, about what are the, atrocities that the Muslims face after this? Anyone aware of them? If you want to, you can type your answers into chat. Yeah, so one was the Mongols, right? The infamous Mongol invasions of the Muslim world that pushed it to a level of, threat of extinction that the Muslims faced at that point that they had never ever faced before. But even before that, there was two more major calamities that the Muslims faced that actually weakened them to allow the Mongol invasions. Anyone know what the other two were? Or even one of the other ones? No? So the other one before the Mongols was the Crusades. But even before that, the Muslims were, you know, even before the Crusades itself, the Muslims had started to be divided. The Abbasid Khilafah was no longer this one large empire that ruled over. See this green outline here. This is the extent of the Abbasid Khilafah. One man ruled over this entire empire. However, by the time the 10th century kicks in, the Muslims are divided into smaller states because there's the rise of Shia polities who become very, very powerful at this time and establish their own Khilafah, the Fatimid Khilafah. Then smaller Muslim dynasties also pop up at this time. And by the end of the 11th century, the end of the 1000s, the Muslims were divided into so many different polities. It was as if every single city, especially if you look at, Greater Syria, every single city had its own independent ruler. The Khalifa in Baghdad, the Abbasid Khalifa, he was just more of a figurehead, if anything. Didn't really have any proper power to exercise. And at this time, after all this infighting, the Crusaders came, and that was the first time the Muslims faced a foreign invasion. And although, 100 years later, the Muslims were able to kick the Crusaders out of Jerusalem, about 70 years later, or 60 years later, but or even before that, 20, 30 years later, the Mongol invasions begin of the Muslim world, and they push the Muslim world to the brink of extinction, an atrocity that the Muslim world has never seen. Some people began to question Islam itself. Some people began to say, even think that the Mongols were Ya'juj and Ma'juj because of how uh, great the destruction was. But during this time in 1258, when the Muslims Baghdad was sacked, 2 million Muslims were killed within the span of a few days in Baghdad, and many old and famous cities were destroyed. Barely anything was left in these cities, barely any humans were even left in these cities because of the destruction. At that same time in 1258, when Baghdad was sacked, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala planted the seeds of revival within the Muslim empire. In a quiet corner in Western Anatolia, parts of modern day Turkey, Usman the First was born. Sultan Usman the First was born in 1258. And who was Usman the First? He was a member of a Turkic tribe called the Kayyu tribe. And his father had began to, strengthen his tribe. But Osman the First is the one that truly lays the foundations for a state. And why did he do this? What happened was Osman the First, he once saw a dream. And in that dream, he saw a tree grow out of his chest. And this tree covered the entire world. And the next morning, he asked his teachers, well, what does this dream mean that I saw a tree grow out of my chest and it covered the entire world? And his teacher told him that this means that you will be given dominion and sultanate, and you will rule, you and your ancestors will rule over large, large parts of the world. And now, spurred on by this idea that that he had a divine destiny to create an empire and revive the Muslim world once again, Osman I went on to expand his tribe and conquer large parts of the Byzantine Empire. Many ancient cities in the Byzantine Empire fell under his rule, Osman I. And when he passes away in 1326, his son Orhan takes over. Now, this was a very pivotal point in the rise of the Ottoman Empire, because now that the man who started all of this has passed away, everyone's looking around thinking, what's going to happen? Can we continue to do what has already been started? And so his heir, Orhan, he also has a brother through Osman. Osman the First, he had two wives. And so Orhan is through one wife, and his brother Aladdin was through Osman's other wife. And what Orhan tells his brother Aladdin is that, listen, let's split up our empire, our father's land. You rule over half, and I'll rule over half. And we'll be allies, we won't fight with each other. And Aladdin tells Orhan that no, in Islam, there is no such thing as two rulers. And he gives the example of the Mongols, who when Genghis Khan died and his sons and grandsons, they split up his empire into different parts. They started fighting with each other, and the Mongol Empire fell. And he tells his brother Orhan that we don't want this to happen. So Orhan, you rule over the empire, and I will help you. And so what sort of happens here is Aladdin sort of becomes like the first Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, whilst Orhan goes on to conquer more and more cities. Aladdin ensures that the administration in these cities is established properly. Ottoman administration and control is established properly. And so together they expand the empire into far and wide. And then after Orhan passes away in 1362, Murad the First also takes over and continues the same thing where he expands the empire into the Balkans. Now the Balkans are a part of Central Europe, areas like Albania, Serbia, Hungary, all these parts you can say are part of the Balkans. And he begins to expand the empire further into the Balkans. And he's the first Ottoman Sultan to be killed in battle at the Battle of Kosovo. After Murad passes away in 1389, nearly 30 years of rule, Sultan Bayezid I takes over. And Bayezid I had a very interesting name. His surname was called, his title that was given to him was Thunderbolt. Bayezid the First, Sultan Bayezid I the Thunderbolt. Why was he given this name? Because you see, the Ottoman Empire controlled both Europe and Asia. So they had two fronts. They had to fight in Asia and they also had to fight in Europe. And Bayezid I was known to be able to take his empire very quickly from Asia to Europe and then Europe to Asia again, to cross from one side of his empire to the other very, very quickly. And so he was given the name the Thunderbolt because of this. And Bayezid expands the empire rapidly, more rapidly than any other sultan before him. But he is then captured and killed in battle, and now the Ottoman Empire falls into civil war because his sons start to fight over the throne, and it falls into civil war. And you can see Bayezid the First, who passed away in 1402, and the next ruler comes in 1413. So for 11 years, the Ottoman Empire was, fighting a civil war. And then Mehmed the First, or known by the Ottomans as Mehmed Çelebi, he reunifies the empire after the civil war, and reunites it and establishes himself as the sole ruler of the empire after defeating his brothers. And after he passes away in 1421, Sultan Murad II takes over in 1421 to 1444. And you can see he has two different reigns. Between 1444 to 1446, he didn't rule the empire. And we'll talk about what happened at that point shortly. And he, what he did was, although Mehmed the First was able to unite the empire internally, there were still external threats that needed to be dealt with. And so it's Murad the First who fights off the Crusaders and stabilizes the empire from any external threats. And this, after Murad II, is where our story of Sultan Mehmed II, the young Sultan, begins. I just wanted to pause there. Are there any questions so far on anything that's been discussed so far? On any of the sultans themselves or anything like that? Okay. If there are any questions, you can put into the chat, or feel free to yeah, just you can put into the chat if there are any questions. Now we move on. This is a very quick map of the Ottoman Empire. So you can see that the purple is from Mehmed II. Anything within the range of purple, so all these, sort of light beige color, brown color, before that, these ones in the orange colors, these are all the expansions that were done by the sultans just before Mehmed II. So anything before the purple is how big the Ottoman Empire was just before Sultan Mehmed II actually comes to the Ottoman throne in 1451. So now we move on to actually Sultan Mehmed II. Who was Sultan Mehmed II? Sultan Mehmed II was born on March 30 in the Ottoman capital city of Adana in 1432. And from a very young age, he was given a very, very high level of education. The scholars say that some of the reports say that he had memorized the Quran. Most of the reports say that he was a student of Islamic sciences. He was also not just Islamic sciences, but normal sciences as well, such as, physics, chemistry, all these different things. He was also a student of those. He had a deep passion for those subjects, mathematics as well. And he was also a student of history. And we'll see how that plays into his conquest of Constantinople and how all of his education was so pivotal to his conquest of Constantinople. Not only that, he could also speak 7 different languages. The historians record that aside from just Ottoman, he could also speak Arabic, Latin, and many other languages of his time. And what happens is in 1444, at the age of 12, and some sources actually say at the age of 9, he becomes the Sultan. Because what happens to his father is his father, Murad II, after fighting off so many, crusades and threats, like we said at the beginning, is that it takes a toll on Murad. And Murad, one of his wives passed away, and one of his sons passes away. And his son, his elder son, who was actually meant to become the Sultan, according to Murad, he passes away. And so this takes a mental toll on Murad II, and he becomes very, like sort of disturbed mentally. Not like, in terms of psycho or anything, but he just becomes, very sad because of these difficulties that he faces. And so in 1444, after he secures the Ottoman borders, he tells his young son, Mehmed, that now you will be the Sultan. And so at the age of 12, Mehmed comes to the throne. And obviously, Murad just doesn't leave him on his own. He surrounds him with all his experienced ministers that he had, and he gives them to Mehmed II as well. Now, when Mehmed becomes the Sultan, he's only, some say 11, some say 9, some say 12, when his father abdicates the throne. So the Europeans see this young boy on the throne, and they think that, you know what? This is our chance to deal with the Ottoman Empire. This is our chance to attack them and destroy them, because there's a 12-year-old boy on the throne. He can't stop us. So the Europeans get together, they form another crusade, and they launch an invasion of the Ottoman Empire. But what happens is when he does launch this invasion, Mehmed II becomes he doesn't know what to do. He's worried. He's a young boy. He doesn't know how to fight off these threats. So what he does is he writes to his father and asks his father to come and help. But his father responds by saying, I am not the Sultan anymore. The Ottoman Empire is under your protection, under your rule, under your custodianship. You have to protect the Ottoman Empire. And Mehmed, again, 11-year-old boy, 12-year-old boy, he doesn't know how to defend his empire against the entirety of Christian Europe. So he writes to his father and says, listen, my father, if you are the Sultan of the empire, then come and defend your empire. But if I am the Sultan, then your Sultan is commanding you to come and defend the empire. So he tells his, it's a very, very famous letter. He writes to his father that if you are the Sultan, come and defend your empire. But if I am the Sultan, then I, Sultan Mehmed II, am commanding you to come and lead my armies. And so Murad II, he will not refuse the request of his Sultan. So he comes back and he defeats the Crusader army at the Battle of Varna in 1444. And now there's two sources, different accounts of what actually happens here. One account says that in that at this point, after winning the Battle of Varna, Murad II fully reassumes the Ottoman throne, and he sort of tells his son that kicks his son off the throne. In another account, what happens is at this point, just going back to the first account where Murad sort of takes him off the throne, they both fight together against the Europeans in further battles until yeah, sorry. What happens is in 1444, when Murad II comes back and wins at the Battle of Varna, he takes his son off the throne, and they both fight together against the Ottomans, against the Europeans, until obviously 1451 when Murad actually dies and Mehmed becomes the Sultan. Another account of what happens is that Murad wins at the Battle of Varna in 1444, and he leaves again. And then in 1446, when Mehmed is still the Sultan, a civil war is about to erupt in the Ottoman Empire again because the Ottoman elites and the Ottoman army, the elite units of the Ottoman army called the Janissaries, they are not happy with Mehmed II and they don't want him as a sultan anymore. So they rebel. And just when the Ottoman Empire was on the brink of a civil war, of a battle between Mehmed and his supporters and the Ottoman Janissaries, Murad II comes back and stops the civil war. And he sends Mehmed back to the Ottoman province of Manisa to continue to govern while Murad remains as a sultan. And then when Murad passes away in 1451, this is when Mehmed II finally becomes the Ottoman Sultan at the age of 19. And he begins his preparations for the conquest, for the siege of Constantinople. And 2 years later, after becoming the Sultan, he lays siege to Constantinople and enters as the conqueror. Are there any questions so far on any of the things that have been discussed on the Ottoman conquest or on the Ottoman Sultans, Mehmed II, anything like that at all? Okay. So moving on now, then the we discuss Constantinople. Just before we actually talk about Mehmed II, just want to discuss a bit more about the history of Constantinople itself, very, very quickly. Like we said at the beginning, Constantinople, if you see here, these are some pictures of what Constantinople looks like. A very beautiful and grand city, one of the greatest cities ever built in human history. And if they say the world, Napoleon said, if the world was one country, Constantinople would be its capital. It was built in 330 CE by Constantine the First himself, Emperor Constantine. He obviously, we know that the capital of the Roman Empire was Rome itself, but he wanted to wanted to create a new city, and he saw that there was an old city called Byzantium between Europe and Asia, and so he builds this city up. And when it is finished being constructed, he names it after himself, Constantinople, and establishes it as the new capital of the Roman Empire. And then we know that there were many, many sieges, including two sieges under the Arab Muslim empires in 640, 674 and 717, both under the Umayyad Khilafah, but both were pushed back. And then Constantinople was actually sacked in 1204 by Latin crusaders who took the city off the Christians. So another Christian party came and took the Constantinople off them, but then the Byzantines took it back soon after. And then in 1422, the Ottomans, they laid their first proper siege on Constantinople. There were attempts to blockade it and raid it before, but the first proper siege under the control of the under Ottoman rule happens under the during the time of Mehmed II's father, Murad II. But again, because of internal turmoil and external threats on the eastern side of his empire, Murad was forced to retreat. Okay, so now we move to back to Mehmed II. So a question: how did Mehmed II react to being removed from power? This is a very good question. So Mehmed II, like we said, was removed from power. He accepted it, although he obviously different sources comment different on what happened. Although he wasn't too happy with not being the Ottoman Sultan anymore, he understood that he was too young and he had to go back because he couldn't rule the empire anymore. And so he accepted his father's decree and continued. And obviously his teachers consoled him and explained to him why, and he accepted it and went back to Manisa to continue to learn to govern. So although he was upset, he, sort of just took it on the chin and accepted that it was, it is what it is sort of type situation, if you want to put it that way. Um, so now what happens afterwards? Mehmed II is the Sultan, and all roads in everything that was happening in the Ottoman Empire was leading up to the siege of Constantinople. All roads lead to Constantinople type situation. This is what was happening in the Ottoman Empire. Mehmed II, he did key things, very, very specific key things to ensure that the siege was successful. One of the first things he did was, see, the Ottoman, if we go here, see, the Constantinople itself was, this is Constantinople. If you look at the map here, this is Constantinople. And there's different bodies of water around Constantinople. And here is where the sort of the Byzantine, the Roman, the Christian ports were on this side. And what Mehmed did was to ensure that nothing could enter into um, to this area, this body of water, to make sure that nothing could enter there to resupply the Christians in Constantinople. There was a fortress that was already built next in this area here. There was already a fortress built by his grandfather, Bayezid I, that sort of stopped anything that was entering into Constantinople. But he wanted to make sure that nothing at all could enter. So he built another fortress right opposite, parallel to the one that was already built. He built another fortress called the Rumelia Hisari. And that ensured that absolutely no ships could enter into Constantinople, because if they ever tried, the cannons on these fortresses would destroy those ships. And so that was the first thing he did. He built the Rumelia Hisari fortress. It was a fortress in Europe on the Bosphorus, and this cut off any aid that would come to Constantinople. The other thing he did was he realized that any time anyone tried to besiege Constantinople and conquer it, they were always stopped by the walls, the infamous Theodosian walls of Constantinople. These are what those walls look like, these massive, massive walls of Constantinople. And so he commissioned someone called Urban, who was a famous Hungarian cannon master, and he asked him to build him a cannon that would destroy these walls of Constantinople, the Theodosian walls of Constantinople. And so Urban built him a cannon called Basilica. And he famously said that not only can this cannon destroy the walls of Constantinople, but it can destroy the great walls of Babylonia itself. And so this was his cannon that he would use to breach the city's walls. The other thing he did was he reorganized the Ottoman army. He incorporated elite units into it, siege specialists into his army. He equipped his army, his soldiers with, the most modern technology that was out there. And he also built a powerful navy to blockade Constantinople from the sea, because the war, he knows, can't only be won on land but also on sea. So he built up the Ottoman navy and made it very, very powerful. And the other thing he did was he also realized that his father, the reason his father failed his siege of Constantinople was because there was external threats from other fronts, from Europe and from Asia. So Mehmed, he made alliances with his European rivals to ensure that they would not attack him when he besieges Constantinople. And this made sure that the Ottoman army was only focused on Constantinople and nothing else. And all these different things, the Ottoman war machine was put into full gear and ready to conquer Constantinople. Everything that was happening in the Ottoman army was leading to Constantinople. He ensured that he put in scholars. He created teams of scholars to go to people and to go to the Ottoman army, different soldiers in the Ottoman army, and inspire them and tell them about the hadith that they will one day surely conquer Constantinople. He would reorganize the finances of the Ottoman Empire to ensure that they had enough money for a long and brutal siege. Now, what's the importance of talking about their preparations? You might think, we could just go into the siege and just talk about what happened, but we need to understand the preparations to truly understand how uh, difficult this siege was. It's not just you turn up with an army and you stand outside and attack it a few times and eventually enter. There's a lot of preparation that goes behind it that they needed to ensure that they did. Now, I just want to ask a question for you all. You can put your answers into the chat. Which preparation do you think was the most important in ensuring that the siege was successful? Was it the cannon that he built? Was it the treaties with the neighbors? Was it the fortress? Or was it the reorganizing of the Ottoman army? If you can just, quickly, whatever you think is, just put your answers into the chat. Whichever one you think was the most important for the conquest. So, I see some people are saying it was the fortress. We've got two answers saying the fortress, some people saying the treaties. Um, every answer you can justify. Every answer you can justify to be correct because all of them were, really, really important. Without the treaties, it could be that he wouldn't be able to hold the siege on for so long. Without the fortress, Constantinople would constantly be resupplied. So there's no point of besieging a city if it's just getting resupplied. So you can argue for any of these factors to be the most important. Now, move on to, so this is what the fortress looks like, the Rumelia Hisari fortress. So you can see a very, very complex fortress with cannons at the top to ensure that no ships could pass. And this is a painting of what the cannon would have looked like. The cannon was so large, some of the Ottoman historians record that the Ottoman soldiers would say that it was as if Israfil himself had blown the trumpet of the Day of Judgment when this cannon was fired, because it was that powerful and loud. Now, what were the preparations the Byzantines took? They knew that a siege was coming. They knew Mehmed II wanted Constantinople. So what they did was they called for aid from Christian Europe. But the problem was most of these Christian Europeans were Catholics. So a lot of them rejected. But the Pope said that he would help if Christian Constantinople, the Byzantines, Constantinople became Catholic, because the Byzantines were Orthodox Christians. And the Pope told them, if you become Catholic, we will help you. And very famously, the elite, the rulers, the politicians in Constantinople, they said that we prefer the turbans of the Turks to the long hats of the Catholics, meaning we'd rather the Turks rule over us than we all become Catholic. So because of that, there was very minimal aid that actually came from Christian Europe. Also in Byzantine, a very famous siege, a person who was skilled in castle defenses called Giovanni Giustiniani from Genoa came to help, and that really, really helped the Byzantines last for as long as they did. Also, these walls that you see here, these Theodosian walls, which had pushed back every army that ever came, was repaired to ensure that it was very, very difficult for the Ottomans. And then also someone called John Grant, who was a Scottish expert at siege tunnels, also arrived. So he would ensure that if anyone tried tunneling under the walls, which the Ottomans did, he could try and stop that. And also, very importantly, there was a chain called the Halich put over the Golden Horn. So if I show you here, this is the Golden Horn, the body of water right near Constantinople. And you see this chain here, this was put over, this something called the Halich, a steel chain that was put there to ensure that no Ottoman ships could enter into this Golden Horn and attack the sea walls of Constantinople. So the Ottomans could only attack through land. And these were the Byzantine preparations to try and stop the Ottoman war machine from conquering Constantinople. And so now on April 6th, the siege of Constantinople begins. Mehmed, his army marches to Constantinople on April 6th. They begin the siege. And Ottoman troops, if you look here at the maps, they besiege Constantinople on all fronts. First, by the land walls here. These are the Ottoman soldiers. So most of the army was focused here. parts of the Ottoman army were on the other side of the Golden Horn, on the other side of the body of water. And then the Ottomans, right outside the chain, they stationed all their ships. They couldn't go in, but they stationed all their ships right outside the Golden Horn. And obviously, they also blockaded them on the other side of the sea walls as well. And so, for the most part of the siege, the Ottomans they unleash a massive artillery bombardment on these Theodosian walls of Constantinople through land, and they keep bombarding these walls. But the problem with bombarding these walls with his cannon, his massive cannon basilica, yes, it managed to destroy a part of the wall, but by the time the problem with this cannon was it could only fire every 3 hours because it was so large and it takes so long for it to cool down. And so by the time it cools down and is ready to fire again, the Byzantines have repaired the wall. So when the cannon fires again, the Byzantines repair it before it can fire again. And so the cannon, although yes, it's useful in causing damage, it's not entirely useful because it's doing damage, but the Byzantines are just repairing it, the damage. And Mehmed also launches, attacks on the walls with soldiers, but most of these are pushed back by Giovanni Giustiniani, and the Ottomans begin to take huge, huge losses. And so morale begins to drop within the Ottoman army. Also, the Ottomans try to tunnel under the walls and try to explode the walls using gunpowder from the tunnels. But again, because of John Grant, what he does is something very, very intelligent. He leaves he basically puts buckets of water near the walls. And so anytime there's any digging under the walls, the pressure causes the water on these buckets to move. And so he realizes that, okay, the tunnels are being dug here. And he also begins to dig his tunnels there and attack the Ottoman tunnelers. And this stops the tunnels, the cannons are not working, all the attacks on the on the walls of Constantinople are failing. And so morale began to drop amongst the Ottomans. So much so that even the ministers, the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, and many of his other ministers began to advise him to retreat because he says he's not going to be able to conquer it. The siege has failed. Let's go back. Let's demand some money or something from the Christians and let's leave. Let's save our empire. And so Mehmet, he doesn't really know what to do anymore because he's attacking so much and everything he's tried, he's built a cannon, he's built a fortress, nothing is working. So now what does he do? In a sort of eureka moment that he has this, this is something that really makes him stand out from all other Ottoman rulers, his military ingenuity. And what he does is if you go to our map here, you see all the Ottoman ships were outside the Golden Horn. And this area here, there was a hill that was surrounded by forests. And what Mehmed does is he realizes that he can't pass this chain because it'll destroy his ships. So instead, what he does is he tells his soldiers that to cut down this forest that was here. And with the ropes, so all the trees that are cut down, we will turn them into logs that we will grease and put on the floor. And then we'll line up all these greased logs and we will carry our ships over these grease logs. And then we will drop them into the Golden Horn. So literally his soldiers, they cut down a forest and they line up all these grease logs and with their hand tie ropes to ships and carry those ships over the walls. And obviously it's not easy to carry an entire ship, but all his soldiers, they do that and they drop these ships into the Golden Horn. And now the Byzantines wake up one morning and they're shocked. They're thinking, at least our sea is safe. The Golden Horn is safe. And they just see Ottoman ships outside there in the Golden Horn. And it's like they don't know what to do because they thought they were safe. And so the Ottomans now begin to bombard the sea walls of Constantinople as well through with their ships. But still they are not able to break through. They launch attacks on the sea walls, on the land walls, but the Byzantines still hold on. It's a very courageous and ferocious defense they put up of Constantinople. They will not let their city fall. They will not let the Roman or the Byzantine Empire end. So they continue to fight. And now Mehmet, he's tried absolutely everything. He still has no idea what to do. And rumors now begin to spread in the Ottoman court, in the Ottoman camp, army camp, that is coming from Europe. A large Crusader army is coming from Europe to help the Christians. And morale drops really low, and even Mehmet has no idea what to do. All his ministers, apart from a few, are telling him that let's retreat. But this man who was, inspired by this idea of a divine. Just one more thing, sorry. You see these walls here. Even though that the Ottomans are attacking, you might think, well, they have a large army. Why can they not attack? Because these walls have three layers. Let's say Mehmet's army destroys this first layer. Now they have to run past and go to the second layer. But this field, it becomes a killing field. Arrows, Greek fire, burning oil is chucked on the Ottomans as they try to go. And even if they try cross the second one, then they have to cross the third one. And it literally is they are killing fields. The Ottomans cannot cross because of Greek fire, oil, arrows. All of this stuff makes it very, very hard for the Ottomans to cross. And but so all everyone tells them to retreat. But Mehmed, a man who was inspired by a belief that it was his destiny to conquer Constantinople, his mother at the age of 4 would take him to the shores of Constantinople and would point to Constantinople and she would ask his son, my son, do you know what this is? Do you know which city this is? And she would tell him that this is Constantinople. And you, my son, will one day conquer this city. His teachers told him that, Mehmet, it will be you that will conquer Constantinople, no one else. And he had this belief and this unyielding resilience and determination to stay and conquer Constantinople. For him, he famously said that either I will have a throne in Constantinople or I will have a grave in it. He once said that either I conquer Constantinople or Constantinople conquers me. I will not go back and I will either conquer it or I will die here. And so on May 29, in the early hours just before dawn, Mehmet tells his soldiers, tonight I want you to all stand in prayer, make lots and lots of dua, pray tahajjud, pray your Fajr Salah, all of you in congregation, and make dua that we will, for Allah to grant us conquest. And so on May 29, he launches one daring assault on the walls of Constantinople, all out assault on Constantinople. He tells the entire army to attack. Understand that if his army was to fail, there would be no army left in the Ottoman Empire. When Mehmed goes back to Adana failed, anyone that is left will kick him off the throne, and he probably will be assassinated by his own ministers at this point. It was a gamble, an all-out gamble. Either he conquers it or he dies. He knows this. And he lived by those words. He was someone who talked the talk and he walked the walk. He said, I will either conquer Constantinople or I will die. And so he launches this one last, final, daring raid on Constantinople. Are we taking Maghrib break? Yeah, we should finish before Maghrib. It's not long left, maybe about another 10 minutes, and we'll finish up. And so Mehmet launches one final attack on Constantinople, and he launches the volunteers. The volunteers are pushed back. Then the regular army units go, and they are pushed back. And then finally, the Janissaries are about to go. And his Grand Vizier tells him, if these Janissaries go, these Ottoman elites, our final set of soldiers, and they're pushed back and they are destroyed, we have no army left. But Mehmet says, no, they will go. And he leads the charge himself. And they go and they attack. And finally, Ottoman forces breach the city. The flag of the Ottoman Empire in Islam is planted on the walls. Justiniani himself is killed, is wounded, and retreats. The Byzantine defenses crumble. And Constantine himself, the emperor, he realizes it's over and he takes his armor off and he fights and dies like a normal soldier, and nobody knows what happened to his body or where it was. And so Mehmed II finally, after all this time, is able to conquer Constantinople despite the difficulties, despite the pressure from his own ministers, despite the losses, the severe losses, watching his own soldiers be killed so much, be burnt alive. He conquers Constantinople on May 29th. Now, just very quickly, again, I want to just for you guys to just put your answer into chat. Which reason do you think was the most important for the conquest of Constantinople? Do you think it was the cannon? Do you think it was Mehmet's leadership? Do you think it was Byzantine weaknesses, that Byzantine Empire was just so weak they were going to collapse anyways? It wasn't any of this other stuff. Do you think it's because the Ottoman army was so strong? Or any other reasons? Just very quickly, if anybody has any thoughts, what do you think was the most important? Some people, so I can see most people are saying it's Mehmed II's leadership. Everyone's saying Mehmed II's leadership. And again, like we said, all these answers can be argued to be correct. That is history itself, right? Where we try to argue for any of these points can be argued. There are no right or wrong answers. And now a new era begins on May 29, 1453. Mehmet enters, and this is a painting of Mehmet entering the city. He enters the city on May 29, 1453, and immediately orders that key buildings are protected. No one is allowed to destroy. Initially, he did tell his soldiers that when we go there, we can loot or whatever. But as soon as he enters that city, something enters his heart, and he says, "No, this is not right. We can't loot a city that we just conquered. We shouldn't do this. We are Muslims. We came to liberate, not to destroy and pillage." So he quickly restores order. All key buildings are protected. Widespread destruction is prevented. And the Hagia Sophia, this building here, if you go all the way back here, you can see this is Hagia Sophia at the beginning. This picture here, no minarets, nothing, and you can see there's a cross at the top. Mehmet, he orders that the Hagia Sophia is turned into a masjid. Hagia Sophia was one of the most magnificent and marvelous buildings in Europe, perhaps the most marvelous architecture in Europe, and he orders that it be turned into a masjid. But the paintings that were there in Constantinople, Hagia Sophia, the marvelous, amazing paintings. Mehmet was a patron of arts, right? And he realized that he doesn't want these paintings to be destroyed. So he said that don't destroy these paintings, just cover it up with our own paintings and our own calligraphy, but don't destroy this amazing work of art. And Constantinople becomes the new capital of the Ottoman Empire and renamed into there's different names. Some people refer it as Constantiniya, which is a Turkish word to say Constantinople. Some people call it Islambul after that. And obviously today we know Constantinople as Istanbul. And he launches a massive rebuilding and repopulation effort of Constantinople because at that time, it's become depopulated and poverty was rank in, Constantinople. So he builds it up as the grandest and most magnificent city in the world. Muslims, Christians, and Jews all work together to revive Constantinople, make it a hub of education and trade. And he even appoints a Greek Orthodox church leader promoting religious tolerance and constructs many palaces, masjids, and schools. And this conquest earns himself the name of Fatih. And so the Ottomans refer to him as Fatih Sultan Mehmed II. And Istanbul rises as one of the most powerful and most prosperous cities in the world, rivaling Baghdad itself. And obviously, this brings us to the end of our webinar. Um, some recommended readings that if you want to know more about this conquest, there's a really amazing book actually I have here with me by Dr. Ali Salabi called uh, Sultan Muhammad Al-Fatih. Actually, he's no longer here. So it's somewhere else. So Sultan Muhammad Al-Fatih by Dr. Ali Salabi is an excellent read, a very short book on the history of the Ottoman Empire and also the conquest of Constantinople. There's a short article on Ajnadayn Institute itself about Sultan Mehmed II. Lost Islamic History provides a very good brief overview, and there's a longer read if you're interested called The History of Muhammad al-Fatih. And there's also a really good documentary that I would recommend made by one of my friends called From Sultan to Caesar documentary about Sultan Mehmed II's siege of Constantinople. So these are some things that I would recommend to read. Now, just on a ending note on the conquest of Constantinople, it's important to remember that the final victory, yes, we talk about Sultan Mehmed II, but it's important to remember that the final conquest wasn't something that was delivered by one man. It was an effort, a coalition effort between, Ottoman politicians who worked tirelessly to ensure that the finances of the empire was kept well, to ensure that a siege could be done for so long, and they supported the Sultan himself. It was the work of the scholars who ensured that the morale of the soldiers was kept high. It was the work of the mothers who sent their sons out to go and fight for the Sultan, for the Ottomans, for Islam to conquer the city. It was the efforts of the people who chopped down that forest and carried those trees over carried those ships over an entire hill and dropped it into the Golden Horn. All of this collective effort was the effort of the Sultan's family, his wives, who ensured that peace was kept in his own palace when he went out for such a siege that went on for nearly 2 months. And all of that obviously centered around the efforts of Sultan Mehmed II ensured that the flag of Islam was planted in Constantinople. Um, so I just see some questions. Would you recommend the Rise of the Ottoman series? Yeah, the Rise of the Ottoman series on Netflix is a really, really good series on the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. It's there's two seasons on it. One season on the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople, and another season on Sultan Mehmed II and his war against Vlad Dracula. So that is a really, really good series. I would recommend that. There's also a Turkish series called about Mehmet as well, which you can also watch. Just in the most recent episode, like spoiler alert, his most recent episode, the Conquest of Constantinople actually happened. So that's a really good series. I can see another question is why wasn't Greek fire decisive, especially when it saved the Byzantines many times before? So Greek fire again, it was really really destructive even in this siege as well. It was very difficult for the Ottomans to conquer Constantinople because of the Greek fire for Mehmed II. But because of how many soldiers there were and all the other things Mehmed um, did, he sort of managed to work around the Greek fire, if that makes sense, because he knew that the Greek fire would stop his soldiers, and it did. But he ensured that he just sort of worked around the Greek fire by doing other things, such as the cannons and just so many soldiers who were trained as well. What long-term effects did the conquest have on Europe? So Constantinople being conquered now solidified the Ottoman Empire as the most powerful empire in the East and the West, and it spread fear across the Christian Europe on basically who is next. And in the latter stages of Sultan Mehmed II's life, he actually wants to conquer Italy, and he establishes a base in Italy. He conquers the port city of Otranto in Italy, and he wants to conquer Rome. That conquest of Otranto actually made the Pope flee Rome out of fear of Sultan Mehmed II and his army. So yeah, did have a long-term effects politically. Also, in terms of education, lots of scholars came to Constantinople from Europe. Knowledge was spread. Trade was also spread as well. Trade was made easier through the conquest of Constantinople. So those were some long-term effects. How did Mehmed II maintain the morale of the army, especially after all the failed attempts of conquering Constantinople? So he himself was a very good orator. He was able to give lots of speeches to inspire his soldiers, especially on that last night before the attack. He also um, reminded them of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which says, comes in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, that you will surely conquer Constantinople, and how wonderful will its leader be, or its leader will be the most wonderful of leaders, and its army will be the most wonderful of armies. And he inspired his soldiers that don't you want to be this army that the Prophet ﷺ gave glad tidings to. He also created small uh, groups of scholars who went out and ensured that the morale of his troops were kept high. Did any Christian power attempt to retake Constantinople? No one really attempted to retake Constantinople afterwards, up until World War One, because the Ottomans were just way too powerful. Like they had a very strong navy. The empire spread across three different continents. You're talking about attacking the heart of the Ottoman Empire itself. It was very, very difficult for them because they couldn't even take the border city from the Ottomans. How can they attack the capital city of the Ottoman Empire? So yeah, some good questions. Um, so that brings us to the end of our webinar. And it's important, just on a final note, I'll say that we talk about the sacrifices that everyone made. It's important that we remember these sacrifices and memorialize these sacrifices, because maybe without the conquest, we're not just here to, have, like a story session. Wow, what an amazing story. We're not here to talk. It's not just that. We learn these stories so that we can memorialize. We can memorialize and remember these great sacrifices made by these people of the past that ensured that Islam came to us and Islam established a foothold in Europe. If it wasn't for these people, maybe these things wouldn't have happened. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the efforts of Sultan Mehmed II, his entire army, his family, all the scholars, everyone that was involved, his ancestors who raised him, and his children and grandchildren who continued on with the conquest and ensured Islam remained strong. The Ottomans, they carried the flag of Islam for over 600 years all alone. No one else. Islam was strong and powerful, and the Muslims remained protected because of their efforts. And that's why we should make dua for them. We should remember the great sacrifices they made for us to have Islam today. Because if it wasn't for them, who knows if another empire would have been able to rise. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. And if you are interested in learning more, alhamdulillah, we are pleased to announce that Ocean of Islam and Ajnadayn Institute together will be launching a 13-week online course where we'll be studying the history of the Islamic world from pre-Islamic Arabia all the way to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in World War One. So how the world was before Islam. We'll be looking at the reign of the Prophet, the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We'll be looking at the reign of the Rashidun Khilafah, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Seljuks, the Ottomans, the intellectual golden ages, the advancement of Islamic sciences, fiqh, aqidah, Imam Abu Hanifa, all of these different scholars. We're looking at like we said, the Seljuks, the Crusades, the Mongols, the Safavids, the Mughals, all of this we'll be looking at in this 13-week online course, all the way up until the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in World War One, and also how Muslim nation states rose to power and how we have all these countries that we have today from one unified pan-Islamic empire to all these different nation states. So we'll be launching this course. It will be beginning on Thursday, 1st of May, so 2 weeks time from now. It'll be every Thursday, 7:30 p.m. around this time up until 8th, about an hour ish. We'll be provided with exclusive course material to read, and we'll be having lots of discussions. It won't just be talking. Like we said, we had a lot of these questions, so we'll be having these discussions as well. So you can engage in some discussions, build historical analysis skills, and also we'll be able to understand why the Muslim world is in the situation it is today, contextualize the modern Muslim period. There is an early bird discount that after our webinar today finishes, we will be sending out recording of this webinar along with an exclusive registration link that will give you an early bird special offer of only £20 a month, 4 sessions a month, 4 hours, but probably even more, 6-7 hours a week, only for £20 a month. It'll be led by myself, and yeah, it'll be like the tagline we're giving it is the course we're calling it Rise of the Crescent, and the tagline is relive the tale of humanity's greatest civilization. So we're looking at the rise and fall of some of the greatest Muslim empires to ever walk the face of this earth. Be like a time machine. We'll be going, period by period of what happened in the Islamic world. And with that, if there are any other further questions, feel free to ask. True, the history strengthens our iman, helps us to understand. Thank you. You're welcome. Yeah, history, that's what is there to do, that we learn and we appreciate the sacrifice of the people before, and we try to take these lessons and also implement them in our lives today. So we'll leave it there as it is Maghrib time. Jazakallah khairan everyone for attending and listening and all your brilliant contributions and questions. And yeah, like I said, do join our course where we will be talking about more things in more detail. We'll be looking at Mehmed's ancestors in detail, the descendants in detail, and even the people before him and the people after him. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Thank you very much. Anything right I've said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything wrong I've said is from myself and shaitan. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.